Welcome to the presentation of a lecture from Gnostic Radio, a free public service from the Gnostic tradition of Samael en Vior. Gnosis is the root wisdom of all the world's great religions. Gnosis is a universal teaching of practical science, whose goal is absolute liberation from suffering and the complete development of the human being. This lecture is one of many available by free download or podcast. The hundreds of hours of lectures range in topic and complexity in order to address the many needs of humanity. Each Saturday, Gnostic Radio broadcasts live. The live lecture is accompanied by an online chat, allowing listeners to read additional explanations related to the lecture and providing an opportunity to ask questions of the speaker. To learn how to participate or tune into our continuous web broadcast, visit our website for more information at gnosticradio.org. Gnostic Radio is made possible by the financial support of listeners like you. For more information or to make a donation, visit our website at gnosticradio.org. Now, with heartfelt wishes for the end of suffering for all creatures, we begin the lecture. May all beings be happy. First thing that we should do today is to be mindful of those who are suffering. We've all been aware of recent events that have brought a great catastrophe. And there are many thousands of people who are undergoing a great trial. So I would suggest and request that everyone pray to their inner Divine Mother, to visualize and imagine that resplendent source of perfect love, and to beg for her to intercede, to aid those who are in pain. Not only physical pain, but emotional pain, mental pain, spiritual pain. Visualize that divine light, which is the light blue in color, luminous, splendorous, that does not make any distinction amongst humankind, but only gives of itself in order to relieve pain. And pray that your Divine Mother work through you, through your heart, through your mind, and through your body. Imagine that blue light irradiating out, and at the speed of light, reaching those people who are crying out, who are dying, who are angry, who are confused. You have to imagine this and make it real. You have to put your whole being into it, and it will be real. So to begin today's lecture, today's discussion, we begin with this remembrance, not only because there is a terrible amount of suffering happening right now, but also because without mindfulness of that fact, the meaning and importance of these lectures becomes lost. Gnosis as a science, a philosophy, a religion, and an art has a singular purpose. And that purpose is to relieve suffering. Gnosis does not exist in order to fill our heads with theories, or to build big movements, or build churches. Gnosis does not exist in order to attract attention or compete with others. This science, this art, this religion, this philosophy has its single purpose to relieve suffering. That's it. To relieve suffering. And if we're not able to apply Gnosis in that way, we need to learn how. This tradition, although largely unknown in the English-speaking world, is growing rapidly. It is growing all over the planet, precisely because of the practical tools that it offers. Because it embraces and encloses every religion. It illuminates every myth. And it provides to any person practical tools that can be used not only to transform one's own life, but to help others. And in fact, the transformation of one's own life has that goal and that purpose, which is to be of service, to help others. It's unfortunate when we see some spiritual groups and movements, including Gnostic ones, who appear to exist only to build their own pride, to separate themselves from others, to claim to be special, to be separate or distinct or better than others. This is a real tragedy. The fact is, all of us are the same. All of us are one human family. And when any of our brothers or sisters are suffering, we have a duty to help them. It is our responsibility. The distinctions that we presume to have of distance or of different types of relationships are just illusions. When you've deeply understood the practical facts of how nature functions, you come to realize that all of us are brothers and sisters. All of us are closely and intimately related with each other. None of us are isolated from the rest. None. If in this existence we have a small family, parents and children, sisters and brothers, and then we understand that we've been cycling through existence for many ages, that same consciousness that we have within, which never dies, which only changes and transforms, has passed from body to body. And in each body we've had different families, different brothers and sisters, different parents, different wives and husbands. Mathematically, it means that over the course of time, we've had hundreds of thousands of millions of close relations, which means that everyone around us has at one time or another been someone very dear to us, very precious to us. In light of this, it becomes evident that when people suffer, we should care. It's evident that in this time of incredible degeneration, it has become a mark of pride to have a heart of stone. We see this everywhere, especially in television and movies. It's considered admirable to not have feelings, to not have compassion, to not feel love, but instead to be a heart of stone and to be cruel. This is what our media admires now. And if a journalist, for example, reporting on a great tragedy shows emotion, he's condemned. I witnessed this just a few days ago. He's condemned for feeling, for having emotion. This is not right. Nonetheless, it's the state of our world, and we need to be aware of it. Our society is an extension of its individuals. A family has characteristics based upon the individuals that constitute that family. And if you become a little older and a little more experienced in life, you've seen families that have different characteristics. Some that are always in conflict, always fighting, always angry. Some that have an air of depression. Some that have an atmosphere of anxiety. Very rarely do we find a family that exudes love, that exudes acceptance and tolerance. Most of the time nowadays we find broken families, families that are split and fractured because of superficial arguments, because of pride and resentment. If this is true of families, it's true of larger groups, like cities and countries. Cities have characteristics. New York has characteristics. Los Angeles has characteristics because of the individuals who make up that population. And likewise, each of these groups having those shared characteristics and a shared mind have a shared karma. Each of us as individuals, in every moment of every day, through our mind, we create results. Our thoughts produce our life. This is the basic fact, the basic statement of the Buddha Shakyamuni. Our mind creates our life. What we think is what we become. In other words, our psychology originates our experience. When we think in terms of our pride, or think in terms of our anger, or think in terms of our resentment, our life is characterized by those qualities. When we think only in terms of me, myself, what I want, what I need, why not me? Why can't I have this? Why does he have it? Then our life is characterized by envy. And we suffer because of envy. But this phenomena scales up. As individuals have results for their actions and thoughts and feelings, so do groups. This is why in some parts of the world we see suffering more intensely than other parts. In some areas we see a continual presence of war, or a continual affliction of poverty, or an irredeemable affliction of famine. None of these factors are accidental. They are just cause and effect. Neither is it that God wants to punish anyone. God, if you agree with the term, is not a tyrant or a dictator. God, as defined by any religion, is love. How would the pure force of love want suffering? It's illogical.
It makes no sense. And yet we see people now claiming that terrible calamities and terrible events are God's punishment. This is not true. There's no basis for that. There's no evidence for that. It's illogical. Is it punishment? Perhaps. But not from God. You see, creation, existence, is simply a set of laws. Just as in the physical world, we have a given set of laws that manage matter and energy. These are not theories or concepts. They are facts relative to that level of existence. We cite gravity often as an example. Gravity is simply a law. It just is. But it's only in this level. In other levels, there is no gravity. In other dimensions, the laws are different. But in all the levels, there is a single law that is always active, from the lowest regions of existence to the very heights, and that is the law of cause and effect. Every consequence, every circumstance, every situation has a cause. And that situation, that circumstance, is directly related to a cause. There are 4 fundamental aspects of karma that we've discussed in recent lectures. The first one is the certainty of cause and effect. We can verify that. Cause and effect is real. We can verify it physically, and if we're serious, we can verify it psychologically also. We can verify that if we persist in our anger, that anger has consequences. And those consequences are always suffering. Anger never, ever results in pleasure, in peace, in health, in happiness. Ever. There's not a single example anywhere, ever, that lust or anger or pride or envy or fear results in a better state. They always push us into suffering. That's basic cause and effect. The second aspect is called magnification. This says that every action leads to a result that is greater than the action. We have this tendency to think that nature is very mechanical and that 2 always equals 2, as an example. We always think that if I push you, you'll push me back equally. And that's how karma works. It isn't like that. We have to observe nature and we see it's not like that at all. The example I've given before is if you throw a stone into a pond as an action, the consequence of that action is far greater than the initial energy. That initial energy is very small to pitch the stone into the water. But the consequence is huge. The entire pond is disturbed. Not only does that stone hit the water and make an impact, but ripples cover the entire pond, not just the surface, but throughout the body of the water. This exact phenomena is what happens with our thoughts, with our emotions, with our actions. When you speak a word, it is not just heard by the one who is standing next to you. That word, that sound reverberates and travels. So the act of speaking has a consequence greater than the original action. The third aspect of karma is that we can only experience the results of our actions. If we have not produced the cause, we cannot have the result. Now this one we also are very confused about. We have this idea that God can just come down and give us anything. And this is related to this idea that God is punishing people for whatever reason, because we don't belong to the right religion or something like that. The fact is, in every level of nature, if you want to have a given result, you have to produce the causes that create it. It's very simple. If you want happiness, you need to produce the causes of happiness. And if the causes of happiness are not present, happiness will not be present. Very simple. We don't get it, though. Because we continue to nurse our resentments, to harbor and protect and feed our lust and our pride and our envy and our resentment and our fear and our jealousy and our gluttony and our laziness. Many qualities that we indulge in physically, emotionally, and mentally. And because we persist in retaining those qualities in our mind stream, we suffer. This is very basic. This is like the kindergarten level. But we still don't grasp this. I'm emphasizing it because in this lecture today, I'm going to something far beyond the kindergarten level. And I need you to remember these concepts. It's very important. Otherwise, the myth that we'll discuss will not make sense. It's very important to remember this. It's also important for us to understand the events that are happening in our lives and in our world. What this third law of karma, the third aspect of karma, says basically is that anything that happens to us happens because we have causes in us related to that experience. If in your work, your job, you're suffering, if you have pain in your job, it's because something in you is related to that. Somehow you produced a cause that has produced that result. The proof that we don't get it is we keep changing jobs, thinking that we'll change the cause. We think the cause is outside. We think the cause of our suffering is our spouse, our job, our city, our house, our government, or some other country. Some people love to blame the Chinese for everything. Some love to blame the Americans for everything. The fact is, if we suffer, the fault is ours. Period. Now, that suffering that we experience may be transmitted to us through someone else. This may be. But it doesn't mean it's their fault. If we suffer, it's because we deserve that. We're getting what we have earned. This is why the Bible states, every man will reap what he has sown. This is not just talking about agriculture. It's talking about action. Physical action, emotional action, mental action. Now you'll notice I keep talking about these three aspects. That's because we actually have three brains. Three areas of psychological activity, or not just psychological, but activity in general. We talk about three brains because these are areas of our psyche through which action is performed. Our intellect, or our what we think of as the brain, the physical brain. This is where we experience thinking, thoughts. We then have the emotional brain, which is a different kind of processing that happens, a different kind of arena within which we have experience and we have actions. And then we have what we call the motor, instinctual, sexual brain, related with the body, the spinal column, and with our sexual energy. And each of these are independent and process energy in their own way. We've already given many lectures about the three brains, and there's many books that you can study about the three brains, and you should. because your suffering passes through these. To change suffering, to change your experience of life, you need to understand your three brains, how they work, how they function, what they're good at and what they're not good at, and how to use them in the right way. Unfortunately, we have tendencies to rely on one too much. Some of us are too much in the head. We try to resolve everything in life with thinking, with logic. And we ignore the heart, our feelings. And we ignore the impulses we get through our motor center, through our instinct, and through our sexual center. Or worse, these other centers, the motor, instinctive, sexual, and the emotional, are creating all kinds of havoc in our life, while in the meantime we're trying to resolve everything with the intellect, with the mind. We can't control our emotion or our sex because our mind is out of control, because the mind is dominating our activities. This is pretty common amongst North Americans, Europeans, to have the intellect be dominating the other brains. The problem is the intellect is the slowest and the stupidest. Because the intellect only compares. It can only compare an idea with an idea. And that's all it can do. The intellect does not have intuition. The intellect does not have feelings. That's why we love this idea of the cold, hard heart. If you look at these images in our media and these characters that we all love nowadays, they are cruel and very intellectual. They use the mind as a weapon. They criticize. They make jokes. They attack. They're very smart, but have no feelings, no emotions. When do you see your action heroes cry? When do you see them feel remorse? When do you see them feel compassion, pity, love? You don't. You see them feel lust, anger, a desire for revenge, envy, jealousy, maybe fear, but that's it. No virtues, none. Only animal behaviors. They're like animals with guns. And the same is true of comedians and other actors and other characters from different types of art that we call it. This is all really important. The reason is these three brains are just machines. They are not us. They are not our identity. They are not our consciousness. The consciousness is different. The three brains are just machines. They're just like devices. The intellectual one compares A and B. Thesis, antithesis. Yes, no. For, against. Right? And sometimes there's a maybe in the middle, but it's always looking for A or B. That's the intellect. That's all it does. It plays games with theories, with ideas, and concepts. We love this now because we think, mistakenly, that the intellect is our intelligence. It is not. And we think mistakenly that the intellect or the brain is our identity, and it is not. Case in point, you can have your intellect damaged, and you're still a person, you're still alive, without intellectual capacity. Many people like that. Beautiful people that are not intellectual, but still alive and beautiful. Damaged, but still conscious. This shows that the intellect is not our identity. It is not who we are. The brain is not who we are. The brain is a machine. If you take the energy out of the brain, the person dies. The energy is the person. But it's not just in the physical brain, in the head. That energy is also in the heart. The heart, or the emotional center, is where we feel. But again, this is just a machine that interprets feelings. It is not the feelings themselves. Don't confuse the bulb with the electricity. Get it? The heart, the emotional center, is just the bulb. The physical brain in the head is just a bulb. It's like a very simple, well, it's not simple. These are very sophisticated machines. But when we simplify it for our understanding, we see these machines only do a limited range of functions. In the emotional center is where we have all our feelings. And here, we also have this duality. Good feelings, bad feelings. Right? Love and hate. That range of feelings that we have. In the middle, there are those that are somewhat indifferent or vague. But you always have this polarity, plus and minus, in all the brains. Plus and minus, plus and minus. And likewise in the motor instinctive sexual brain. You have sensations. All kinds of sensations. The gross physical sensations, like the ones we feel in our skin, on our tongue, in our eyes, in our ears, in our nose. But more subtle ones also, related with the three nervous systems. And incidentally, those three nervous systems are related with the three brains. I don't know if you know we have three nervous systems, but we do. The motor instinctual sexual center, or brain, is really three parts. We call it a brain, the third brain, but it's really three aspects. So you can say we have 5 centers, or 3 brains. It's the same thing, just different way of grouping it. Here we have the sexual center, related with the sexual organs. We have the instinctive center, related with the base of the spine. And we have the motor center, related with the top of the spine. So these 3 areas of activity, or processing of energies, psychological energies. These 3 are very deep. You see, when we have a strong sexual impulse, it overrides emotion and intellect, right? When we feel gravely threatened our life, that instinct to preserve our safety or the safety of our children is far stronger than emotion or intellect. If you've ever been in an earthquake, you've experienced this. I've been in an earthquake. And in my experience in an earthquake, my emotional center and my intellectual center turned off. They were off. The only center active was my instinct and my motor skills. That's it. So until you've had an experience like a very serious tragedy or a very serious accident, you won't grasp what that means. But when you've had that experience, you'll know. Soldiers, for example, people in war zones, slip right into this. That's why they go through so much training, because when you're in a life or death situation, your intellect doesn't function the way it does in common life. Neither does your emotional center. You're down to instinct and motor skills. And that's why they drill. They drill and drill and drill to teach the motor center how to act and save their lives. They can't intellectualize. They can't theorize what to do when their life is on the line. And they don't have time to see how they feel about it, because these other centers, emotional and intellectual, are too slow. The fastest center is sexual. It's incredibly fast. Nonetheless, these 3 brains are machines that process energy. They receive energy, they transform it, and they transmit it. So let's observe our daily lives and see how our machines function. We call this the human machine. It is our physical body, but also our protoplasmic bodies. They're all related here. Our physical body and our vital body are related with the third brain, motor instinctive sexual. Our emotional body, or astral body, is related with our emotional center. And our mental body is related with the intellect. These bodies, or psychological vehicles, are where our thoughts are. where our emotions are. And our energies are in the vital body. These are on the tree of life, or Kabbalah, as Netzach, Hod, and Yesod. The triangle just above Malkut. Some traditions call these the bodies of sin. And that's because through these three brains, or three bodies, we act. But we act in mistaken ways. We act influenced by desire. Hypnotized by sensations. Sensations in all three brains. Hypnotized by ideas, by feelings, and by impulses. And each of us is weaker in one place more than another. Some of us are weaker in a more instinctive way. Some of us are weaker in a more emotional way, and some intellectual. Again, there are many lectures and books you can refer to study this, to understand it deeper. The problem here is that these transformers of energy create consequences. Remember, I explained that every action has a consequence. Every thought is an energy that produces a result. We have this mistaken notion that our mind is isolated from everything else, that our mind is in a little bubble, and no matter what we think or feel, it doesn't affect anything else, and it has no consequences. This is a complete fallacy. There's zero evidence for that anywhere in the world. And if you've studied physics, especially quantum physics, you will know the stark reality of this. Your thoughts, your consciousness impacts nature. Even now, in the last 50 years or so, physicists have come to the realization, the stark reality, that their consciousness has an impact on nature. That's why all the physicists are going and running over to the Tibetan Buddhists and saying, help us out. Did you know that? The top physicists in the world have yearly conferences with the Dalai Lama because they can't figure out certain aspects of physics that the Tibetans have known about for thousands of years. It's happening. The physicists need help, and they're right to look for it. They're right to go to people who know, like the Dalai Lama. Because his tradition, like the Gnostic tradition, understands consciousness is an energy. Consciousness has an impact. The physicists have measured, for example, that when they observe a given element, the element changes. That if they put an element in a certain atmosphere, it will behave a given way. But if they observe the element, it changes its behavior. Therefore, the element, such as light, is aware that the person is observing it. In other words, these small particles that we think are lifeless and just matter or just energy actually have consciousness and can sense our consciousness. Who among us has understood that? Because if we did, we would realize that our entire body is made of those types of atoms, and the bodies of everyone else around us is made of those types of atoms, and so is this entire planet. Therefore, our consciousness impacts each other, and our consciousness impacts our world. When things happen in life, it's for a reason. Somebody created it, but not God. Somebody created it by cause and effect. So let's look at this. This body that we have, the physical body, in the esoteric traditions is symbolized. You see, for the last few thousand years, the mysteries that we're unveiling to you in these classes were all hidden. They were protected because humanity was not prepared to understand them. But now these concepts, these explanations, these mysteries are being revealed so that we can take advantage of them and use them. Through that period of time, all of this was represented in symbolic forms, so the different members of the traditions could communicate with each other. And there are many traditions that communicated this knowledge. Every myth conveys this wisdom, but hidden. The tradition of alchemy in the West and in the Middle East conveyed all this knowledge, but in a hidden form, in a symbolic form. The Bible contains it. The Nordic myths, the Aztec myths, the Greek, they all hide this. Today I'm going to talk about a Greek myth that relates to the previous lectures you've had about the Hebraic satanic myth, about Lucifer and Satan. Today we're going to talk about Persephone. Persephone, for me, is one of the central, most important myths in the world. Yet it's very difficult to reach its meanings. Partly because, like most religions, like the Bible, people read them literally and think that's it. People think literally that Adam and Eve were a man and a woman who had kids and then had incestuous relations to produce the rest of humanity. It's ridiculous. It's never happened. Adam and Eve is symbolic. In the same way, Persephone is symbolic. It symbolizes something of importance to us. So thousands of years ago, in the area around the Eastern Mediterranean, Greece, countries like that, there were initiates who were teaching this knowledge secretly to initiates, to people who took initiation. They took vows. They swore to not reveal it. And that's why now there is very little written evidence of what those teachings were, because those initiates upheld their vows. Those mysteries were called Eleusinian, the mysteries of Eleusis. And these are probably the most famous esoteric school in the West. What made them famous was that the members observed a strict code of behavior. They were renowned for their purity, for being good citizens, for having a very high moral character. Their enemies accused them of all kinds of things. So there are many rumors and myths or, gossip about these groups. But the central core drama or myth of the Eleusinian mysteries is the drama of Persephone. So I want to talk about this a little bit and concentrate, because this myth is not easy to get. It's not. But if you start with this understanding of how we operate as a machine, then the myth can start to open up its gifts to you, because it contains a very beautiful gift. Persephone is the name of this goddess who is represented as the daughter of Zeus and Demeter. Now, of course, as usual, we tend to think of these stories as if the Greek thought that these gods were the way we think of God now, like an old man up on a throne somewhere, throwing thunderbolts at humanity to punish them. This is not the meaning. I know humanity likes this idea about God, that God is an old man in the clouds, that just every once in a while comes and puts his foot on people to crush them and make them suffer. This is not the case. God is love, but God is God's. You see? Look at this example of the tree of life. What we see here on the tree of life, which is the root of Christianity and Judaism, is a beautiful symbol of the diversity of God. The entirety of it is God. The entirety of it is intelligence. But it is not a man. It is not a person on a throne. It is existence. It is everything. That is God. But God is God's. When existence unfolds, there are levels and levels and levels and levels and levels of energy and matter, far beyond this physical world. Our physical world is at the very bottom, the densest level, the hardest, the most compact, the third dimension. But more subtle, superior is the fourth dimension, the fifth dimension, the sixth dimension, and then you get to the 0 or seventh dimension, which is a level of such subtlety, it's far beyond the ability of our machine to grasp it. Our consciousness can grasp it intuitively and through experience, but the intellect cannot. The heart cannot. And the motor instinctive sexual brain cannot. We can theorize about God all we want in our intellect. We can believe whatever we want in our heart. We can feel devotion, or we can feel antipathy, or even resentment against God in our heart. And I know now, in these moments, a lot of people feel a lot of these things. When great tragedies happen, many people immediately remember God. For days and weeks previous, they don't think about God at all. But then a great tragedy comes and they think, why does God let this happen? How could God do this? Why does God let this and this? Et cetera, without understanding what God really is. The Greek myths beautifully illustrate what God is. And if you've studied Greek mythology, you've become very confused. And that's good. God is not simple. God is not a cartoon character. The Greek myths have been made into cartoon characters. They are not that. Zeus, for example, nowadays is thought of as a lecherous old man who just went around and slept with any female he felt lust for, without any comprehension of what those stories illustrate. You see, Zeus was the father of Persephone, but also her husband. Later. We're not going to talk about that part today, but as an example, Zeus fathered many gods, but also had children with his children. And so we think of that the same way we think of Adam and Eve. Well, how can that be? That's incest. That's criminal. That's wrong. Because it's not literal. We have to remember every myth, every religious story is not literal. It's symbolic. Not only is it symbolic, but it has many levels of meaning. Samael Aun Weor told us, any myth, any religious story has 7 meanings. Now, he was probably being symbolic there too. Not literal. But you have to grasp that. Every story has meanings at different levels, different ways of applying the story. Persephone especially is true of that. The myth, the story of Persephone. There are many meanings hidden in this brief story. Anyhow, her parents, Zeus and Demeter. Zeus, of course, represents the father of the gods. In other words, we could say the father of Christianity, Odin, Brahma, any of these very high symbols that represents the ultimate reaches of divinity in manifestation, a manifested God. His wife, Demeter, the divine mother. Her attributes are related with fertility, bounty, nature. She's the goddess of the harvest. What's beautiful in both of these symbols is that they are very deep and very complicated. When you go back and read the original descriptions, not the comic book stories that we have now that people talk about, but the original Greek descriptions, they're extremely beautiful, but very difficult to grasp because they came from a series of initiatic mysteries that were not revealed to the uninitiated. We are uninitiated, and we're trying to penetrate something that is not revealed to us. And so we make up stories. We make up interpretations, and scholars have been doing it for centuries, and they're wrong. Flatly. They're wrong. Persephone has another name, which is Horai. These are both Greek names. They have Latin versions also, the Roman versions. Persephone is known as Proserpine. But in Greek, it's Persephone. The name Persephone means, well, let me tell you the myth first, because I want to tell you the myth before I tell you the meaning of the name, because the meaning of the name is shocking. But you won't really realize it till you hear what the myth is. So I'm going to tell you the story of Persephone first, and then we'll talk about the meaning of the name. I'll read you one brief excerpt from a Greek poem. This poem is almost 3,000 years old. And it's good if you can use your imagination and imagine these images. It will help you. While apart from Demeter, lady of the golden sword and glorious fruits, Persephone was playing with the deep-bosomed daughters of Okeanos and gathering flowers over a soft meadow, roses and crocuses and beautiful violets, irises also, and hyacinths and the narcissus, which Gaia made to grow at the will of Zeus and to please Polydector, to be a snare for the bloom-like girl, a marvelous, radiant flower. It was a thing of awe, whether for deathless gods or mortal men to see. From its root grew 100 blooms, and it smelled most sweetly, so that all wide heaven above and the whole earth and the sea's salt swell laughed for joy. And the girl was amazed and reached out with both hands to take the lovely toy. But the wide-pathed earth yawned there in the plain of Nysa, and the lord Polydegmon, with his immortal horses, sprang out upon her, the son of Kronos, Polynomos. He caught her up reluctant on his golden chariot and bare her away lamenting. Then she cried out shrilly with her voice, calling upon her father Zeus, the son of Kronos, who is most high and excellent. But no one, either of the deathless gods or mortal men, heard her voice, nor yet the olive trees bearing rich fruit. Only tender-hearted Hecate, bright-coiffed, the daughter of Perseus, heard the girl from her cave, and the lord Helios, Hyperion's bright son, as she cried to her father, the son of Zeus. What that little excerpt describes is what nowadays is called the rape of Persephone. Rape is the wrong word in modern context. It could be also abduction. There are different versions of this story. But what it tells is that the name that's given here is Adonis. That's Hades, Pluto. Hades, or Pluto, or Adonis, is the brother of Zeus. So here we have these two names of God, or two gods, symbolic representations. Zeus rules the heavens, the superior worlds. His brother rules the lower worlds. Where else do you find this twin, these twins, the twin brothers? Quetzalcoatl and his twin, who ruled the upper and lower realms. Christ and Lucifer. In the Greek mysteries, Zeus represents Christ. Not Christ as Savior, but Christ as cosmic Christ, that light, that superior ray that illuminates all creation. In the superior aspect, we call it Christus. We also call it Prometheus. It is that light that descends and gives fire. But when it hits a certain aspect of nature, it unfolds into the inverted aspect, which is Lucifer, the bearer of light. That is Hades. Now, we're talking in this myth about something from the very ancient past. This doesn't yet relate to the situation we have made on this planet or in our mind. At this level, Zeus and Hades are gods. This is like early in the Bible when Lucifer was the greatest amongst all the angels. Right? He was the most resplendent angel. This is related to that. This is before the fall. So here's our basic structure for this story. Zeus above, Hades below. Brothers. Hades observes the daughter of Zeus and falls in love with her. That's Persephone. And in the myth you see that Persephone is in a garden filled with beautiful flowers with all of her sisters, goddesses. Amongst them Artemis, Athena. All virgins. That's the meaning of the name Kore. Persephone's other name is virgin. Now, how interesting is this? That we see Eve in the garden. Here in Persephone. It's the same symbol. And what happens to Persephone? She becomes entranced by a beautiful flower. What else is that flower but the fruit of the tree of knowledge? The Garden of Eden is splendorous. It is beautiful. But in the Hebraic myth, the warning is given, do not eat of that fruit. Now, in the initiatic aspect of this story, the same warning was given to the initiates, but not in the myth for the public, because they're not initiated. This myth only is the public version. It doesn't have the hidden parts. There's much more to it than what's written in the text that survived those 3,000 years. So Persephone becomes entranced by this beautiful flower. Remember the name of the flower? Narcissus. Remember who Narcissus is? He's that beautiful young man that falls in love with his own reflection and dies. This is important. What does Persephone represent? Your soul. Your consciousness. Another name for Persephone is Psyche. It's the same symbol. Psyche is another name, is another myth, but represents the same aspect of us. So Persephone, or our consciousness, becomes entranced by that flower, Narcissus. That entrancement relates to many things. Again, remember, this symbol has so many levels. We barely have time to scratch the surface of one. It relates to events from the past, and it relates to us right now. That flower represents self-love, ego, the I, sensation. It represents how our consciousness becomes entranced by our own reflection. And we forget God. And we forget everything. And only thing we see is that aroma of the flower and the beauty of the flower. And what happens? The earth splits and Hades comes and takes her. Right? To hell. This is what has happened to us. And it happens every day. When we become entranced by the flowers of the garden, by sensations, by thoughts, by feelings, by egos, by emotions. I was telling you before that every myth is symbolic. Throughout the traditions of alchemy, in the Bible, in the Hermetic tradition, earth represents the physical body. When Hades, the god of the earth, splits the earth and leaps up to grab Persephone and bring her into the earth, this is a symbol of the fall from Eden. When Adam and Eve left the garden because of their own action. It's a symbol of how the consciousness, which was in the fourth dimension, fell into the third. Of how the soul left its heavenly level of existence, living in innocence and purity as a virgin soul, and fell into Malkut, the kingdom. This is when these Sephiroth were separated. This is the fall, the exile. This is when suffering begins. Can you see that relationship? That the myth of Persephone is the same myth of Adam and Eve, but packaged differently. What happens then is that the god of the earth, Pluto or Hades, takes Persephone into his kingdom, which is Malkut, the physical body, and keeps her there, and she can't leave. And she's very sad, distraught, and refuses to eat. This is related to how our consciousness is trapped. Not by the tyranny of a god, but because of karma. You see, Pluto is not evil. Hades is not evil. Hades loves her. This is the thing that gets hard for us to grasp because we're so used to comic book religion. We're so used to like Superman and Lex Luthor or God and the devil that we're not capable of thinking about how the reality is, which is extremely sophisticated and based on laws. Pluto is a god. Pluto represents that aspect of Christ that loves humanity and purifies humanity by the application of laws. You see, life and death are natural and normal. We need that for our development. But we don't get it. We don't understand death, so we're afraid of death. And when death happens, we get mad. We get angry. We get resentful at God, at nature, at each other, because we don't understand death. Death is normal. Everyone here will die. And everyone here has died many times before. There's nothing unusual about that. The problem is that we are asleep. That our soul, psyche, sleeps. Longfellow, I think it was Longfellow, the soul is dead who sleeps. That's us. If we were to awaken psyche, we would understand death. We wouldn't be afraid of death. So likewise, we wouldn't be afraid of Pluto. Pluto rules Malkut. He's in charge of the body. But unfortunately, when our consciousness became trapped in the consequence of our action long ago, we did not repent from the mistake. We kept making the same mistake. So gradually, over many thousands of years, remember, every time you make an action, the consequence is greater than the action. So what happens if you keep doing that moment after moment, day after day, for 1,000 years, 2,000 years, 3,000 years, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000? Those consequences are going to get immense. If you've studied mathematics, you know all about exponential scales. The ego is the exponential outgrowth of a simple thing. Being identified, being asleep, not paying attention. That's karma. The entire state of this whole planet is that. What's happening in Hades is terrible. There's no question about that. But it is a sliver of a fraction of what's happening on the whole planet and what's there mathematically as our karma. It is a sliver, almost immeasurable how small of a portion it is of the karma of this humanity. And that's why all the prophets and religions and traditions have all said there will come a great heat and a great fire, and not one stone will be left upon another. It will happen. This is not a cause for fear. It is a call to action. You see, in the myth, Persephone gets out. She gets out of hell. But it's not easy. On the surface, or in heaven rather, her mother, Demeter, realizes that her daughter is missing. And she becomes very distraught. And the description of her emotion is very long and beautiful in the myth, which we don't really have time to read today. And she wants to find where her daughter is. There are many symbols in this search of Demeter for her daughter, many initiatic mysteries hidden there. And eventually, Hecate, another goddess, and Helios, the sun, tell her, your daughter is in Hades, in the realm of Hades, with him, by arrangement with Zeus, to be married. And Demeter becomes upset and says, until I see my daughter before me, nothing will grow on the earth. Because she's the goddess of grain, of growth, of bounty, of life. And so everything on the earth begins to die. All the vegetation, everything. The earth becomes barren because of her mourning for her daughter. This is symbolic. This represents us. Persephone is our soul, our consciousness. Demeter is our divine mother. Is our life a bounty of virtues? A bounty of heavenly gifts? Are we eating of the nectar of the gods in our daily lives? Are we taking the ambrosia and nourished as a god, as Adam and Eve were in the garden? No. Our earth is barren. Our philosophical earth. Us. Our Malkut. The planet is also, because it is an extension of us as individuals. If we as individuals were angelic, virtuous, and pure, our planet would be a paradise. Our planet is hell because our minds are trapped in hell. Each of us as a Persephone are trapped in hell because of our defects. Simple. We have to see that. We need to deal with it. We need to act. You see, those 4 qualities of karma state something very simple. If you want to have a consequence or a situation, you need to produce the causes. If we want happiness, if we want Persephone freed and to be united with her divine mother, that means your consciousness united with your divine mother. You have to produce those causes. And what are the causes? Cultivate virtue. Restore your place in the garden. abandon all of those things that belong in hell. We know what they are. Lust, pride, envy, gluttony, greed, laziness, etc. But that isn't a matter of making an affirmation or making a promise to God. It is a matter of action. Today, right now, in each moment, observing your mind, observing your heart, observing your body. Get to know these three brains. Look at the energies that move through them. What are your three brains creating? What are you allowing your three brains to create? You see, these three brains, this machine, is a transformer of energy. That's all it does. It transforms energy. The problem that we have is we don't realize who's using the machine. We don't know, we don't remember how to distinguish between virtue and vice. We have a lot of mistaken ideas. We can't tell the difference now between the being, the innermost, that which is pure in us, and the ego. So we go through our daily lives just letting whatever comes up come out. We exercise no will over our mind, our heart, or our bodies. What happens here, this is, again, it's going to be another subtle point. The many names of Hades given in this short scripture are important. He's named several ways. He's called Polydector. He's called Polydegmon. He's called Polynomos. Those are all Greek names for Hades. Poly is the beginning of them all, right? Poly means many. Polynemos means he of many names. Polydegmon means the host of many. Why? Because in his kingdom, there are many. Who's in his kingdom? The ego. Desire. Anger. Lust. But those are not outside of us. Those are inside of us. We are the kingdom of Hades. Our body and our mind. You see, the energy that enlivens action is consciousness. You are alive, seeing, breathing, feeling, because you have consciousness, Persephone, psyche, an essence, a Buddha Dhatu, Buddha nature. That is what enlivens your ability to be here and now. When that energy moves through your mind and is conditioned by pride, the result is an element. Something is created. That energy doesn't just dissipate. Have you studied physics? Have you studied Einstein? Matter and energy cannot be destroyed. They can only be transformed. That famous theory, E equals mc squared, that means that. You cannot destroy energy. That means that what you think doesn't just dissolve. It doesn't just go away. It creates. It exists. It's real, but not physical. You sense it physically, but thoughts process in the fifth dimension in relation with Netzach. Emotions process in the fifth dimension in relation with Hod. They are forces. They are matter in those levels. Those forces create. So when that force moves through the mind or moves through the heart or moves through the body and is conditioned by something that breaks a law of nature, something is made, but not something from heaven. What is made is Cain. Remember the myth of Cain and Abel? Cain is the son of Adam and Eve. Cain is the outcome of their sin. Cain is the mind. Cain is the ego. What is made is Nimrod. What is made is the Pharaoh. What is made is Pilate. Caiaphas, Judas. Those are all names of what results from wrong action, wrong thinking, wrong feeling. In Hebrew, those are called klipha. We've been talking about this in recent lectures. Klipha means shell. So what is made here, when that energy is maltransformed, is a vessel in which energy is conditioned. That vessel is not physical, but it is real in the sense that it exists in its level. It's what we call an ego or a defect. It is a crystallization of forces. Forces that polarize. So those forces that extend down the tree of life, that enter into us through our three nervous systems, and that enliven our existence, that we then utilize in the wrong way, are then transformed by our human machine, but cannot be held in heaven. Cannot exist in the superior worlds, because the superior worlds, there's no pride. There's no ego. There's no lust. Those elements fall into the realm of Pluto. The Lord, the host of many. Those elements trap the energy inside of them. This is what we now call subconsciousness, unconsciousness, infraconsciousness. Very deep levels of the mind that we scarcely suspect. But that constitute 97% or more of what we are. And that's because as our consciousness has been cycling through existences for many thousands of years, we have exponentially been creating a bigger and bigger and bigger pile of klipha, shells. In their whole, in their entirety, are properly called klipot, the inverno, the averno, the infernos, hell, the infernal worlds. That is, your subconsciousness is hell. That is why our planet is sinking into hell. That is why this whole society is sinking into hell. Because our mind is in hell. And we are bringing our mind to the surface. We are indulging and celebrating all of our defects. And we're inviting everyone to join us. Come along. Let's celebrate anger. Let us invite everyone to indulge in lust. Let us share pornography with everyone. Let us legalize every known abomination on the planet. That is what we say. That is what we're doing. And that is why we suffer. Hades is the Lord of the many. The one who oversees the management of those forces. Hades is a god. He is Lucifer. But unfortunately, he's trapped with a very heavy burden. And he doesn't have many options. You see, all matter and energy is managed by laws. There's a quality of nature called mass. You've heard of mass? Mass is the given density of a certain element or phenomenon. And there's something called critical mass. And that is a level at which the mass grows to a point that it can no longer be sustained. We are at that point. This planet is reaching critical mass. That's why the planet is shaking. The planet is trembling. It cannot hold it. The psychological energy, the consequences, the karma is too strong. Remember I explained to you that our consciousness affects nature? When we observe an element, we change that element. This is how the saints had powers. We always hear about the saints that can talk to the animals, that can manipulate the atmosphere, that can send away the rain or bring the rain. or that can split the seas, or uproot the earth. Because their consciousness has power in relation to nature, nature responds to that power. In the same way, nature responds to that negative power. If a body becomes diseased, the body purges the disease. Or tries, or the body dies. We, the human organisms, are intimately a part of this planet. We aren't separate. We think we're separate from nature, but we are not. These bodies were made by nature, given to us freely by nature. They belong to nature. But we have filled these bodies, these earths, with a huge amount of disease, psychological disease. And thus the earth has no choice but to purge it. It's karma. It's natural. It's normal. It's to be expected. You've heard of Pompeii? Pompeii was a renowned center of sexual degeneration. People came from all over the Asian world to go to Pompeii to indulge in their fantasies. Eventually, that psychological energy became so intense that the earth around it could not sustain it. And the volcano erupted. And the place was destroyed. It happens all over the world. It's happening now. It's not the punishment of God. It's the laws of nature. We have to analyze these things deeply. When we suffer, it's because the causes of suffering are in us. If we want to stop suffering, we have to produce the causes of happiness. Peace doesn't come from anger. Peace does not come from war. Chastity, contentment, comprehension do not come from lust. They don't come from adultery and fornication. They come from chastity and a connection with God, with our own inner divine mother, our own inner divine father. For our Persephone to be returned, she has to be pure. She has to still be a virgin. Horai. But our Persephone is not virginal. Our inner Persephone is the great whore mentioned in the book of Revelation, who revels in filthiness. That must change if we want happiness, if we want peace, if we want redemption. Redemption doesn't come by making affirmations to the sky and promises to God. God doesn't work that way. Everything works on laws, on actions. Everything depends on action, not intentions, on acts done. So let's consider this. Contemplate it. There are very deep messages in this myth. We barely touched it. It's important to recognize these aspects of our psychological state. And it's equally important to recognize that we can do it. We have degenerated, and we are suffering intensely, but there is an antidote. There is a way. There is hope. We have a divine mother who cries for us, who weeps for us, who's looking for us. And as long as we've hidden ourselves in our self-love, in our lust, in our pride, in all of our distractions, we cannot connect with her. But when we sincerely renounce those things that we know are wrong, when we start to listen to our conscience instead of the intellect, listening to our conscience instead of our feelings, and listening to our conscience instead of our impulses physically, then we can start to discriminate. We can start to sense, my conscience, my intuition's telling me, don't do that. We always do it anyway because we think, nobody's going to know. No one will find out. What if I do it one more time? God won't condemn me. God still loves me, even though I'm a demon. We have to listen to the conscience. No one can tell us right and wrong. Only God, only the conscience. You see, Persephone is that conscience. Persephone is the daughter of Zeus and Demeter, our inner divine parents. If we listen to that, we will have the guidance we need. But it takes a lot of strength. A lot. And that's why the motto of this movement is telema, which is Greek for willpower. It is not willpower over others. It is willpower over the ego. And that is empowered by God. That is Persephone, who acts through us. If we do that seriously, listening to conscience, learning to discriminate in ourselves right from wrong, not just in the bigger issues, but little things, all the time listening to that, we act differently. Thus, we create different circumstances. We create different results. And little by little, that big ship of our life begins to turn. Don't expect overnight results. It takes tenacity, persistence, every day, making the practical application, changing, stopping the things you know are wrong, and adopting things you know are right. There are 3 factors that must be applied. Death. We have to appeal to Hades, Pluto, the one inside of us, to help us. To help us manage our kingdom. But you see, Hades is not the one who kills the ego. This is when I'll tell you the meaning of the name Persephone. It means the destroyer. Persephone in Greek means bringer of death. Would you have imagined that? The story of a beautiful virginal maid in the garden, smelling flowers, and then getting abducted by Hades. That her name means bringer of death. Do you know why? Because she is the Divine Mother also. She is the daughter of Demeter. In other words, she is an aspect of Demeter. Our consciousness is intimately related with that. It's not to say that we are the Divine Mother. No. These are overlapping symbols. At the same time, Persephone can represent our soul. She also is the queen of hell, the spouse of Hades, the Divine Mother, Death. Her other names are Kali, Durga, Coatlicue. Many names in many religions. Hecate is another one of her names. And in this myth, we see those 3 goddesses, Demeter, Hecate, and Persephone. And they represent many things. But in their synthesis, they are the Divine Mother. She's the one that has the power to release the repented souls. So there's a quote written many centuries ago about that. I have it somewhere. Plato wrote this, by the way. Plato wrote, "There were certain priests and priestesses who have studied so as to be able to give a reasoned account of their ministry. The priest of the mysteries. And Pindar also, and many other poets of heavenly gifts. As to their words, they are these. Mark now, if you judge them to be true. They say that the soul of man is immortal, and at one time comes to an end, which is called dying. At another is born again, but never perishes. Consequently, one ought to live all one's life in the utmost holiness. For from whomsoever Persephone shall accept requital for ancient wrong, the souls of these she restores in the 9th year to the upper sun again. From them arise glorious kings and men of splendid might and surpassing wisdom, and for all remaining time they are called holy heroes amongst mankind. Plato said that. And I know everybody respects Plato. But what Plato is saying, that these mysteries that we're unveiling today are where the real story is. And what's said here is very interesting. From whomsoever Persephone shall accept requital for ancient wrong, the souls of these she restores. You see, Persephone is Durga, the Divine Mother Kundalini, the Divine Mother Death, the one who can free us if we know her mysteries. That's what we teach. We're teaching you the mysteries of Persephone. Samael and Vior teaches the mysteries of Persephone. The whole tradition is that. First factor, death. The causes of suffering have to be killed. They have to die. The first step, you have to understand them. You have to stop acting on them. You have to stop behaving that way. And when that understanding is complete and that behavior is complete, then Persephone, as Divine Mother, can requite you, can forgive you, can redeem you through the death of that ego. Another face of this is Athena, her sister, who's the virgin who gives the armaments to the warrior to kill Medusa. It's the same symbol. The one who gives the armaments to Perseus, to Theseus, to Aeneas, to descend into the underworld, to redeem the soul, and to kill the impurity. That's the work we have to do. The second factor is birth. We have to create those armaments. That is the soul. The wedding garment, or the Merkabah. And the third is sacrifice, to help others. These three have to be in balance. Birth, death, and sacrifice. Every day, find an ego. Find something in yourself that you know you have to change and work on that. Meditate, observe it, change it. Create new virtues in yourself. When you renounce those bad behaviors, adopt good ones. This is birth. When you see your pride, learn what it means to be really humble. Learn what it means to be really chaste, in chastity, to act, to live that. It isn't enough just to die in the ego. We have to be born in virtue. And what unites them, what is the glue to the whole work, is to help others, to sacrifice in whatever way you can. Everyone has their own way of contributing and helping others. For some, it is teaching. I'm poor. I can't offer anything else, so I teach. Even I'm bad at it. That's all I can do. I apologize. Some of us have other ways we can help. We can make donations. We can volunteer our time. We can give away books. We can go and talk to our friends, our families. We can encourage others to change. We can encourage others to study their own religion or study Gnosis and their religion. There are many ways to sacrifice. It doesn't mean that everyone has to be a teacher or that everyone has to be a millionaire to give money. Every action has a consequence greater than the action. This is as true for good actions as it is for harmful ones. And I give you complete testimony of this fact. Your little action, even though you feel it's so small, my little thing I'm doing to help, has an impact much bigger than that first action. Much bigger. You may not see it. But don't hesitate from doing what you know is right. Do it. And keep doing it. That's how things steadily build. The other thing that's hidden in this quote, and then we'll stop because I know I'm going too long today. It says, the souls of these she restores in the 9th year to the upper sun again. Many people have read this and read it as a theory of reincarnation. because many people study this myth of Persephone and think it relates to how the soul leaves heaven and descends into a physical body and lives for a while and then goes back to heaven. This is a mistransformation, a misunderstanding of the whole tradition. It is not the meaning of these mysteries. And some interpret it all as being just about the seasons. That Persephone and Demeter and the whole relationship of her going into the underworld and coming out later is just about spring, summer, and fall when she's above, and winter when she's below. Yeah, it has some relation with that, but that's not the reason the myth exists. That theory was created by people who were not initiated into the tradition and perpetuated by people not initiated into the tradition. It has a relation with seasons, without question. But the real meaning is hidden in that little line, in the 9th hour. In the 9th day, the 9th month, the 9th year, that symbol appears in many places. That symbol relates to the minor mysteries. The myth of Persephone relates to initiates who just approach these teachings for the first time and have to be tested. And the minor mysteries, the lesser mysteries, of which there are 9. Those 9 minor mysteries are tests that the soul undergoes internally and physically. And the ones who pass are restored into the upper regions again. It says here, restored to the upper sun, the realm of Zeus. The upper sun, the Son, Christ. In other words, those who successfully pass through the minor mysteries are granted access to the major ones. Persephone relates to that. It's an initiation. The whole story of Persephone is an initiation. We didn't even get into the whole story of Persephone. We talked about one little piece of it. It's beautiful, the whole thing. And then later, those who go on to the major mysteries, it says here, from them arise glorious kings and men of splendid might and surpassing wisdom, and for all remaining time they are called holy heroes amongst mankind. And those are the real initiates. Those who become those wise heroes that we always recognize. The greatest saints and prophets and Buddhas throughout history. They've passed through the tests related to Persephone. So, do you have any questions? I know we covered a lot of ground, so yeah.
I'm just wondering what a good book would be to get about the 3 brains.
The Master Samael doesn't go into detail about the 3 brains in any specific book, but he talks about them in many. For example, in the book about Torah and Kabbalah, he talks about the 3 brains. I believe also in the Doomed Aryan Race. And, of course, the books of psychology, the Revolutionary Psychology, Revolution of the Dialectic. But there's no one book about that. There are lectures by him and by other instructors that you can study on the websites. Also, the traditions of Gurdjieff, Ouspensky, Maurice Nicole, there's a lot of information, but not all of it is 100% accurate. You can study a little bit there, too. They have some good psychological tools. Any other questions? Yeah. Nope. There are no lectures or books about the minor mysteries. That's because they are secret. All initiations are secret. And those initiations, incidentally, are not given by any instructor or school in the physical world. So don't think it's an initiation like you have to go to a certain school for a certain amount of time and pass certain tests and give a certain amount of money and then you'll go in. No. Initiations, real initiations, are conducted in the internal worlds by your inner master. Not by anyone physically. So if you are sincerely interested in entering into initiation, live your life that way, and you will. You don't have to go to a school for that. You don't have to follow anyone or pay any money to anybody. If you demonstrate in your daily life the proper causes, then you will receive those results. If you live an upright life, if you observe the laws, if you observe the teachings, if you practice chastity and apply these 3 factors, you will be an initiate. It's natural. It's normal. And let me explain one more thing about initiation. There are 2 great phases, the minor mysteries and the major mysteries. When you have reached the middle point of those major mysteries, you become a human being. That is, you're restored back to Eden. Persephone is freed. Adam and Eve are restored. Eden is once more established. In your psyche. Not physically. Physically, you're in hell until your ego's dead, and that takes a long time. You can do it in one life if you're very dedicated. It can be done. Master Samael did it. Milarepa did it. Many teachers have done it. Another question here? Okay.
Question is, the motivation to do this work, to renounce our desires, should be our longing to unite with our divinity again. Could you explain your practice to reinforce this longing?
So the question is about the longing to reunite with divinity, and is there some practice for that? Yes. Use your imagination. Your imagination is the mirror that can reveal everything to you. Not mechanical imagination, not fantasy, but imagination that is open and receptive and can receive inspiration from God. That means you need to learn to meditate. It's the same tool that the oracles used, that all prophets use, and that all the great teachers and Buddhas have used. Open up your mind. Learn to meditate. Learn to sit and reflect and listen to the guidance you get from inside, and you will get it. To restore that relationship with the divine is absolutely essential. But that won't emerge if you only think about it once every few days or once a week or a couple times a year. You have to be devoted, persistent, never give up. This relates to a practice, or a state, rather, called self-remembering. Most of what I was describing in this lecture is related with self-observation. And this is where you bring your consciousness into the present moment, retain that, and observe what's happening. You observe your psychological states, and you observe the events around you. In the beginning, this is very hard, because our consciousness is weak. We haven't used it. We're asleep. But that needs to be accompanied by the remembrance of the divine. And a very effective way to do this is, in everything you do, in every place you go, don't forget, your divine mother is with you. God isn't separate from you. Your divine parents are not separate from you. You are their child. And the myth says how Demeter desperately searches everywhere for her daughter. It says specifically, bitter pain seized her heart, and she rent the covering upon her divine hair with her dear hands. Her dark cloak she cast down from both her shoulders and sped like a wild bird over the firm land and yielding sea, seeking her child. But no one would tell her the truth, neither God nor mortal man. And of the birds of omen none came with true news for her. Then for 9 days queenly Dio wandered over the earth with flaming torches in her hands, so grieved that she never tasted ambrosia or the sweet draught of nectaros, nor sprinkled her body with water. Our Divine Mother is weeping for us. Remember that. Never forget it. And it will empower you. It will give you a lot of inspiration, a lot of remorse, and a lot of fuel for your work. And this takes willpower. Again, it's willpower to remember, and visualize it, and imagine it, and feel it. Feel the presence around you. Eventually, through that application of will, not only does it become effortless, but you do feel it. And it isn't a projection of your mind. It's real. The problem is we're like a bird trapped in a shell. For that bird to get out, it has to make a lot of effort. It has to push and push and push, and many don't make it. They give up. We're like that. We're in the shell, a klipha. In that shell. We have to break that. And that only comes by constant application. And our mother is just waiting for us. You see, the hen doesn't do it. The child has to do it. So we can cry out to her and she'll wait for us to come out of the shell. But she's going to wait for us. It's the same thing. Is there another question in the back?
Yeah. Would joining the army in order to help others be considered a good action?
Would joining the army to help others be considered a good action? It could be for you. It might not be for another person. Everyone has their own path. Everyone has their own steps they have to take. You have to determine for yourself, what is it your being wants you to do? And no one can answer that but yourself, your being. Another question?
Yeah. Couldn't the ninth hour represent the ninth sphere as well, speaking about overlapping symbology?
Yeah, the ninth hour, the ninth day, the ninth month, ninth year, all of that relates to the ninth sphere. And that ninth sphere relates not only to Yesod, but also to the lowest level of the realm of Pluto. Those 9 spheres in the abyss also relate to the minor mysteries. Yes, it's definitely related. Any other questions?
Yeah, one more. Speaking of myth in regard to Master Jesus' crucifixion, so that never really happened in real history?
The question is about the story of Jesus' crucifixion and if that was a myth. Well, you see, every story has levels of meaning, and they always draw from literal, real events. Yes, Jesus was really crucified. Truly. In actual fact, physically. But it wasn't supposed to be like that. It was supposed to be symbolic. But Jahveh manipulated events so that it happened physically. But it's not the case in every myth. Some myths are loosely based on people or places, like the stories of Moses, for example, that we've been learning in other lectures. There is a real Moses, and he did a lot of work physically, but the story in the Bible is not the story of his life. Most of those events didn't happen. They're symbolic. He wrote them down as a teaching. He wrote those as a way of teaching his story, his wisdom. But it's not a biography or autobiography. So many myths are like that. Some have a few elements of literal events and some don't. Any other questions?
Does the people have made of their religion a klipha?
Yeah, of course. Unfortunately, most of the religions and mythological traditions nowadays are just that. They're empty shells. Klipha. And this is because we've taken the forms, the myths and stories and religions, and filled them up with pride and lust and envy and greed and desire for power. It's very difficult to find an authentic display of the light. It's very rare. And it's sad because humanity needs it. But most people in humanity now are more interested in belonging to the biggest group, or the one that has the most money or the most people, or the one that's the easiest to follow. That's very popular. If you can just say, I believe in you guys and here's $10,000, then I'm going to heaven now. But that's not true. It's not real. No more questions?
Is the 3 brains alignment the first baby step towards initiation?
That's a very good question. So, if the 3 brains are in alignment, is this a baby step towards initiation? Yes. one of the prerequisites to go on to the major mysteries is to have psychological equilibrium. And Samael and Vior talked about this from time to time. What that means is that rather than having this disequilibrium in our three brains, where we sort of have a psychological limp, we're always being intellectual or always being emotional, we have conscious control over ourselves. Meaning that our consciousness is not only aware of these three brains, but is managing them. This is an easy concept to grasp here. But to do it is another thing. To have conscious control over your instinct, over your sexual energy, over your motor body, your motor skills, this is not easy. So to fully establish that means that one should be completely done with all the work. As long as there is ego in the mind, there is disequilibrium in a level, one level or another. So even when Master Samael was working in the second mountain approaching resurrection, he was still finding disequilibrium in the three brains, but not physically. In other realms, other levels. But the synthesis is, this is our first goal. It isn't to be an initiate. It isn't to get the astral body or to get the mental body. It is to have control of the three brains. If you don't have that, you have nothing. And I say it that way because many make the mistake of thinking that the work is about building the bodies. Yeah, it's important. We need to build the soul. But if you do that without the psychological work, you'll become diverted. Very easily. Because with those solar bodies, you channel more energy. And if you can't control the energy that's coming into you now, you won't be able to control more energy. If right now you're very easily hypnotized by your pride, then when you get your solar, astral body, and mental body, you'll be even more easily hypnotized by your pride because there's more energy moving. That's why we see so many mythomaniacs. So many people who become diverted. What's coming in my memory now is a story that Samael and Vior told. A very moving story, a very painful story. About an experience he had in the internal worlds with Hecate, one of the goddesses we talked about today. He observed the suffering of humanity, and she is the Divine Mother Death. And the story is related in the book, The Doomed Aryan Race. I recommend you read it, especially if you are wondering about why the planet is shaking and why humanity is suffering so much. The book, The Doomed Aryan Race, will answer your questions. In the story, part of the story, he's talking with the Divine Mother, and three beautifully dressed ladies come by. And they laugh at him. And they don't bow to the Divine Mother. And he recognizes that these women represent people who are twice born, who have the soul created, who have solar bodies. But they don't bow to the Divine Mother. In other words, they have pride. And she says, I'm going to take them too. So even if you have your solar bodies, it's irrelevant. So let's not make that mistake. What's important is the psychological work. To die. That's the prerequisite for everything, to die. The soul is built as a matter of course. It comes as part of the work. The initiations come as part of the work. But that is not the goal. I repeat it because throughout schools and traditions around the world, we always see this, oh, such and such has reached this level of initiation, and so is this far from this initiation. And they make it like a race, like a competition, like they're going to all have little badges on their vests, you know, like in the Boy Scouts. Like, oh, I finished my sub car racing trophy, so I got my little trophy for my first initiation. This is not the Boy Scouts. This is a matter of the life and death of your soul and the life and death of humanity. It's not a race. Any other question before we close? Yes, sir.
Can the, for example, when we hate a person and we're in front of that person, but on a certain inconvenient situation with that person, and once decide to suffer eliminating that hate, we are helping us, but also is the Divine Mother and all the internal part of that person feels happy for that action?
Of course, anytime you're renouncing and controlling your own inner defects, it's a benefit. It's a form of sacrifice. So absolutely, it's good. Did I understand your question?
Yeah.
Is that right? Okay. Yeah. Anytime we do that, it's important. To close, let me make one last comment. These lectures and the books and the websites and everything else are made possible because people like you are making sacrifices. Even if it's a small sacrifice, it makes a difference. It helps. And we've been asked to encourage you, to ask you to do what you can. Just as humanity is facing great trials and difficulties, so is the spread of Gnosis. This is a very difficult time to try to raise awareness of this teaching. And there are a lot of obstacles. And Glorian Publishing, who's made this possible for all of us to receive these teachings through the lectures and books and websites, needs to grow and needs help to grow. So I would encourage you, if you find these teachings valuable and all the resources valuable, make it possible for someone else to get them. And donate what you can. Those donations make a big difference and make a big impact in the lives of other people. So everyone here, including myself, has received this because someone before me gave a donation. So if we want someone to receive this later today or tomorrow, we need to do the same and perpetuate it and grow it. So I'd like to encourage you to do that. And it's easy to do the donations. There are many ways, and you can learn about it at the glorian.info website. And I've talked enough. See you next time.
The presentation of this lecture was made possible by donations from listeners like you. Help Gnostic Radio to help others. Make a donation by visiting gnosticradio.org. For questions and deeper understanding of this lecture, we invite you to explore the wide variety of resources available on our websites. Thank you for your support. May all beings be happy.